Listen closely, young initiates, for I, Grand Master Vorex Brightclaw, shall tell you a tale that shook the very foundations of our most sacred combat traditions. Oh, and before you ask, yes, this story does involve a human. Pause for dramatic effect. I can already hear your mandibles clicking with disapproval. For 3,000 years, we of the High Council Combat Academy have perfected the art of combat on our pristine world of Nexus Prime. Our crystalline spires pierce the violet clouds, each tower housing centuries of wisdom, each chamber echoing with the whispers of masters long past. The Academy stands as a testament to the dedication of countless species who have contributed to our combat forms. But Grand Master, you say, surely no one can master the path of enlightened combat without decades of study. Chuckles deeply. That's exactly what I thought. That's what we all thought. That's what 3 millennia of tradition told us to think. Our combat forms aren't just about physical movement. Oh no, they're about the perfect fusion of mind, body, and spirit. The sevenfold path of stellar harmony took our greatest master, the legendary Craxix the Illuminated, 300 years to develop. The breath of cosmic wind requires such precise control that most students spend 50 years just mastering the initial stance. Here at the Academy, we have perfected these arts through careful study and meditation. Our training halls, built from the sacred luminescent stone of the ancestor mountains, have witnessed countless practitioners from across the galaxy. The Centaurian masters with their 4 arms, spending decades perfecting each limb's movement. The ethereal void dancers of Epsilon, whose ghostly forms flow through the air like cosmic silk. Even the crystalline beings of the Nexus core, who require a century just to learn how to move their rigid bodies in the prescribed patterns. But then, pauses for effect, voice dropping to a whisper, then came the human. Now, before I continue, let me paint you a picture of our Academy as it was on that fateful day. The 3 moons of Nexus Prime hung low in the sky, their purple light filtering through our crystal dome. The air hummed with the gentle resonance of 1,000 students practicing their forms in perfect harmony. The scent of burning incense from the meditation chambers wafted through our halls, carrying the wisdom of ages. I sat upon my throne of contemplation, carved from a single piece of psychic resonant crystal over 2,000 years ago, watching our most accomplished masters guide their students through the simplest of our forms movements that would take merely a decade to master. Everything was perfect. Everything was orderly. Everything was exactly as it had been for 3,000 years. And then, laughed sardonically then a shuttle landed in our sacred courtyard, carrying a single human passenger who would turn our entire world upside down. But perhaps I'm getting ahead of myself. Should I continue with this tale of how our most cherished traditions were, shall we say, dramatically reinterpreted? The doors of the shuttle hissed open, releasing a blast of pressurized air that disturbed our perfectly manicured meditation gardens. Several floating lotus flowers actually turned their heads away in shock, can you imagine? But that was nothing compared to what emerged from that shuttle. She stood there, all 5 feet 8 inches of her, wearing what she called workout clothes. Sarah Chen, the first human ever granted permission to study at our academy. Pauses to shake head. The council must have been having a collective mental breakdown when they approved her application. Master Krelix Swiftwind, you know him, the one with the magnificent golden scales, actually dropped his ceremonial staff. In 300 years of teaching, I'd never seen him so flustered. But, she's so small. He whispered to me, his scales shifting to a concerned shade of purple. And where are her extra limbs? How will she perform the octagonal stance of celestial balance? Around us, the usual afternoon training session had ground to a halt. Our students, the finest warriors from 1,000 worlds, stared in various states of disbelief. The Mantidean twins, Rex and Vex, clicked their mandibles in that irritating way they do when they're trying not to laugh. The ethereal Princess Lumara actually became so transparent with shock that I could see straight through her to the meditation fountain behind. Welcome to the High Council Combat Academy, I announced, trying to maintain some semblance of dignity. I am Grand Master Vorex Brightclaw. Dramatic pause, though I assume you knew that, given the 12,000-page application process. Thanks. Call me Sarah, she replied with this bizarre upward curve of her mouth that humans call a smile. No ceremonial bow. No formal titles. Just Sarah. Master Solara Dawnfire nearly fainted. Her bioluminescent spots actually flickered out for a moment. The gathered crowd of students parted as Sarah walked through our grand entrance hall. The crystalline sentinels, towering 12 feet tall with their faceted bodies refracting light in complex patterns, turned their heads in perfect unison to follow her movement. The gaseous collective of Beta 9 swirled in agitation, their usually perfect spiral formations dissolving into chaotic eddies. I hope I'm not late for the afternoon training session, Sarah said, bouncing slightly on her feet. Bouncing. In the sacred halls. Several of our more traditional masters had to excuse themselves to their meditation chambers to recover from the shock. Prince Xandrax of the luminous nebula, always one for dramatic statements, floated down from his preferred meditation spot near the ceiling. His 17 tentacles arranged themselves in the traditional pattern of superiority as he declared, "Surely this is some sort of mistake. A human cannot possibly grasp the sublime complexities of our art. Their species is barely 1,000 years old." I was about to agree with him diplomatically, of course, when Sarah did something that made my primary heart stop and my secondary heart skip several beats. She looked at the prince's floating form, tilted her head, and said, "That's an interesting variation of the levitating lotus position. But wouldn't it be more efficient if you adjusted your lower tentacles by about 30 degrees? The entire hall fell silent. Even the ever-present hum of our crystal walls seemed to pause. Because, well, she was right. Long pause for effect. And that was just the beginning of how Sarah Chen would turn our carefully ordered world completely upside down. After that rather unorthodox introduction, we proceeded with our scheduled demonstration. Master Krelix Swiftwind stepped into the chamber of celestial forms. His golden scales now shifted to a deep blue of concentration. The chamber itself, you should have seen it. Thousands of crystal fragments suspended in zero gravity, each one catching and reflecting light in perfect harmony with the movements of a true master. Today, Master Krelix announced, his voice resonating through the chamber, "I shall demonstrate the path of 1,000 stars, a technique that took me merely pause for emphasis 120 years to master." He glanced pointedly at Sarah, who was sitting cross-legged on the floor. Cross-legged, on our sacred training grounds. The audacity. The demonstration began. Master Krelix's form blurred as he moved through the sacred positions. The ascending dragon, the nebula's heart, the quantum fold, each movement caused the suspended crystals to sing in harmony, creating a symphony of light and sound that had taken centuries to perfect. His 17 scaled limbs moved in perfect synchronization, creating patterns that represented the very movement of galaxies themselves. The key, he explained, between movements lies in maintaining perfect balance between all 17 points of cosmic awareness. Another pointed look at Sarah, who had the strangest expression on her face, which naturally requires the proper number of appendages and several decades of dedicated practice. That's when it happened. Sarah raised her hand, like a student in some primitive learning institution. "Excuse me, Master Krelix," she said, and I swear by the 3 moons, she was still wearing that smile. "Would it be all right if I tried that sequence?" The crystals actually stopped humming. Master Krelix's scales shifted through 7 different colors before settling on a modeled pattern I'd never seen before. "You wish to? Try. The path of 1,000 stars." He managed to say, his voice rising an octave, a technique that has taken our most gifted students centuries to even attempt. "Well, yes," Sarah shrugged. "I think I see how it works. It's all about creating resonance patterns through movement, right? Like a 3-dimensional standing wave, but with your body as the initiation point." Prince Xandrax actually laughed, a sound like crystals shattering. "Perhaps we should start the human with something simpler, like standing still, for a few decades." But Sarah was already moving toward the center of the chamber. I should have stopped her. It was my duty as Grand Master to prevent this mockery of our sacred arts, but curiosity, that dangerous, insidious force, stayed my hand. She closed her eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and then, long pause. Well, how do I even describe what happened next? She moved, but not like Master Krelix. No, where his movements were perfect, precise, completely as they had been taught for thousands of years, Sarah. She danced. There's no other word for it. Her mere 4 limbs blurred through the air, and somehow impossibly the crystals began to sing. Not just sing, they harmonized in ways we'd never heard before. "This is fascinating," she called out mid-movement, not even breathing hard. "If you adjust the resonance pattern like this," she shifted her weight slightly, "you can actually create a cascading harmony effect." The crystals responded with a symphony that made our previous performances sound like mere noise. Master Krelix's jaw actually dropped. "All 3 of them. That's impossible," he whispered. "She's modifying the form as she performs it. She's improving it, in real time." Sarah completed the sequence with a flourish that sent ripples of light dancing across every surface in the chamber. The crystals hummed in perfect harmony before slowly falling silent. "That was amazing," she exclaimed, still bouncing slightly on her feet. The way the energy flows through the movement patterns, it's like a combination of Tai Chi and quantum field manipulation. Have you ever tried incorporating a spiral pattern into the third sequence? I think it might enhance the resonance effect. I looked around the chamber. Master Krelix had turned an interesting shade of pale gold. Prince Zandrax's tentacles had tied themselves into knots, and every single student was staring at the human in absolute silence. That's when I realized that our carefully ordered world wasn't just going to be turned upside down. It was about to be completely revolutionized, and we had no one to blame but ourselves for letting a Deathworlder through our doors. News travels fast in the Academy. By the time the third moon rose that evening, every being from the highest master to the youngest initiate was talking about the human. The Quantum Collective had spread the story through their hive minds so many times that they were starting to glitch, their usually synchronized movements turning into chaotic quantum fluctuations. She modified a 1,000-year-old technique. On her first try, the whispers echoed through our crystalline halls. Some students were fascinated. Others? Well, Prince Zandrax was holding court in the Garden of Serene Contemplation, which was currently about as serene as a supernova. His tentacles were arranged in the pattern of supreme indignation, a form that usually takes 50 years to master, but he'd somehow managed it in about 5 minutes. Funny how anger speeds up learning, isn't it? This is an outrage, he declared to his gathering of sycophants, a mockery of our sacred traditions. Did you see how she bounced? Actually bounced. In the chamber of celestial forms, his voice rose so high that several crystal flowers cracked in protest. The Council of Elders wasn't taking it much better. Oh, you should have seen them in their chamber of infinite wisdom, which suddenly seemed a bit finite, if you ask me. Elder Raiden Stormweaver's bioluminescent markings were pulsing so rapidly that several junior council members had to wear protective eyewear. Grandmaster Brightclaw Elder Raiden addressed me, trying to maintain his dignity while practically vibrating with agitation. This human, this Sarah Chen, she completed the path of 1,000 stars in minutes. Minutes. I spent 3 centuries perfecting just the first movement. He paused to take several calming breaths through all 4 of his respiratory systems. Meanwhile, Sarah, she was in the junior training hall, surrounded by a mix of fascinated and horrified students, casually demonstrating her interpretation of the quantum fold technique. See, if you think of it like a wave function collapse. She was saying, moving with that strange fluid grace that seemed to ignore half our known laws of physics, the energy flows become much more intuitive. Several of the younger students were actually trying to copy her movements. The scandal. Master Solera Dawnfire nearly had a conniption when she saw 2 Centaurian initiates attempting Sarah's simplified version of the stellar wind stance. But Master one of them dared to argue, it actually works better this way. Prince Zandrax naturally couldn't let this continue. He slithered into the training hall, all 17 tentacles radiating royal disapproval. You dare to corrupt our sacred forms with your Deathworlder primitiveness. His bioluminescent spots were flashing in the ancient pattern that signifies extreme dismay with a touch of theatrical outrage. Sarah, bless her ignorant human heart, just turned to him with that infuriating smile. Oh hey Prince Zandrax, I was just showing them how to optimize the energy flow patterns. Want to join in? I noticed your upper tentacle configuration could use a slight adjustment for better resonance. The silence that followed was so complete that you could have heard a quantum particle drop. Prince Zandrax's color shifted through 14 shades of indignation before settling on a particularly royal shade of purple. You dare to suggest that I, Prince of the Luminous Nebula, heir to the 1,000 light galaxies, need adjustment? Well, Sarah said thoughtfully, only if you want to prevent spiritual energy buildup in your upper quadrant. That slight misalignment must give you terrible headaches as after long practice sessions. The worst part? She was right. Again. Everyone knew Prince Zandrax suffered from post-practice migraines. He'd spent the last 40 years blaming it on atmospheric pressure. That was when the Council of Elders decided to intervene. They floated into the training hall in full ceremonial regalia, their robes rippling with barely contained cosmic energy. Elder Raiden's voice boomed through the chamber. This situation requires assessment. The humans' methods are unorthodox, unprecedented, and entirely too efficient to be allowed to continue without proper evaluation. I knew that tone. In 3,000 years of Academy history, proper evaluation had always meant one thing: the trial of 7 forms. A test so demanding that only 67 beings had ever completed it successfully. A challenge that had sent even the mighty Craxix the Illuminated into a century-long meditation to recover from his attempt. But looking at Sarah's face as she demonstrated yet another improved technique to her growing group of fascinated students, I had a sinking feeling in all three of my stomachs. This human wasn't going to just attempt the trial of 7 forms. She was going to rewrite it. And there wasn't a force in the galaxy that could stop her. The Grand Chamber of Celestial Challenge had not seen such a gathering in over 5 centuries. Every crystalline surface hummed with anticipation as Prince Xandrax made his way to the center of the arena, his tentacles arranged in what he probably thought was an intimidating pattern. Let me tell you, when you've seen as many challenges as I have, you learn to spot the difference between genuine confidence and carefully rehearsed posturing. Sarah Chen of Earth, he announced, his voice echoing through the chamber with carefully modulated dramatic resonance. I, Prince Xandrax of the Luminous Nebula, challenge you to the trial of 7 forms. Lightning actually crackled between his tentacles, a neat trick that took most practitioners 2 centuries to master. Show off. Sarah, who had been in the middle of teaching a group of initiates something she called breakdancing moves to enhance energy flow, looked up with that perpetual smile. Cool. What's the trial of 7 forms? The collective gasp from the assembled crowd nearly caused a change in atmospheric pressure. Elder Raiden had to be stabilized by 2 junior council members as his bioluminescence went into strobe mode. The trial of 7 forms, I explained, trying to maintain some dignity in this increasingly absurd situation, is our most sacred and demanding challenge. 7 ancient combat forms, each more difficult than the last, performed in ritual combat against a chosen master. Each form. Prince Xandrax continued, his tentacles now weaving the pattern of imminent victory, though if you look closely, you could see his 3rd left tentacle trembling slightly. It takes decades to master. The forms must be performed perfectly while defending against and countering your opponent's attacks. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. So it's like a combination of kata and sparring? With real-time adaptation and energy manipulation. It is nothing like your primitive Earth concepts, Xandrax sputtered, his royal composure slipping slightly. These are the most advanced combat techniques in the known galaxy. The first form alone, the dance of quantum shadows, requires the practitioner to exist in multiple probability states simultaneously. Oh, quantum superposition in macro-scale biological systems. Neat. Sarah stretched her arms above her head, a movement that caused several traditionalist masters to avert their eyes in horror. When do we start? The preparation period for the trial traditionally lasted 7 years. We gave Sarah 7 days. Mostly because Prince Xandrax insisted he couldn't wait 7 years to restore the honor of our sacred traditions. I suspect he also worried she might master everything in the Academy's curriculum by then. Oh, those 7 days. By the 3 moons, I've never seen anything like it. Sarah approached each form with what she called efficiency optimization, while Prince Xandrax spent 12 hours a day practicing the traditional movements. Sarah was, well, the neutron dance is basically just a specialized form of particle physics visualization, right? She said on day 1, while casually rearranging 3,000 years of established technique. If you think of the movements as wave function probabilities rather than fixed patterns, it all makes much more sense. Day 2, the Starfire sequence, is really similar to this Earth martial art called capoeira. Just with more dimensions involved, she proceeded to demonstrate something that looked nothing like the traditional form but somehow achieved the same energy resonance patterns. Day 3, she spent 6 hours teaching junior students her simplified version of the Void Echo stance. Master Krelix nearly had an aneurysm when he saw his students picking it up in minutes rather than decades. Day 4, the pattern of celestial harmony, is basically just a 4th-dimensional kata. With quantum entanglement principles, she was actually giggling while practicing what had taken me 3 centuries to master. Day 5, Sarah introduced something she called parkour into the stellar wind form. Several young initiates had to be treated for excitement overdose when they managed to perform basic elements of the technique in their first session. Day 6, she combined all 7 forms into what she called a freestyle flow sequence that had the sacred crystals humming in frequencies we'd never heard before. Elder Raiden spent 4 hours in emergency meditation after witnessing it. The final day of preparation, I found Sarah in the Garden of Serene Contemplation, sitting cross-legged again with the crossed legs and watching the aurora lights dance across our triple moons. You know, she said without looking up, these forms aren't just about combat, are they? They're about understanding the fundamental patterns of the universe. For the first time in 3 centuries, I found myself speechless. When I finally managed to speak, I asked, "How did you grasp in days what takes others centuries?" She turned to me with that smile, and somehow it didn't seem quite so irritating anymore. Maybe that's the problem, Grand Master. You spend so long trying to perfect each tiny piece that you miss the bigger pattern. Humans were really good at seeing patterns, and really, really bad at accepting limitations. The trial begins at dawn, I reminded her. Prince Xandrax has never been defeated in ritual combat. Then tomorrow will be really interesting. She bounced to her feet. Yes, bounced, but somehow it seemed less offensive now. By the way, I think I figured out how to combine the quantum shadow form with this earth dance style called pop and lock. Want to see? I declined, mainly because I feared my hearts couldn't take any more revelations. As I watched her practically skip away to get some rest before the trial, I realized something that should have been obvious from the start. We hadn't invited a student to our academy. We'd invited a revolution in human form. And tomorrow that revolution would either transform our world forever or crash and burn spectacularly. Knowing humans, probably both. Dawn broke over the crystal arena, all 3 moons still visible in the purple sky. The assembled crowd buzzed with anticipation, literally, in the case of the Hive Mind Collective, who were vibrating at frequencies that threatened to shatter several lesser crystalline formations. Prince Xandrax made his entrance first, his 17 tentacles creating a hypnotic pattern of light and shadow. Very impressive, very traditional, very predictable. Then Sarah walked in, just walked. No ceremonial floating, no energy manifestation, no divine light show. She was even smiling. Several council elders had to be treated for shock on the spot. Begin with the dance of quantum shadows, I announced, my voice carrying through the arena. May the cosmic forces witness this sacred. What in the name of the 3 moons is she doing? Sarah had dropped into a stance that looked nothing like the traditional form. Prince Xandrax began his attack, his tentacles weaving through 17 dimensions of space-time, creating the classic quantum shadow pattern that had defeated countless opponents. But Sarah, she moved like water. No, like light. No, like... Look, we still don't have a proper word for how she moved. She somehow managed to be in multiple probability states without using the traditional technique. She was break-dancing through quantum space-time. Fascinating adaptation of the wave function, she called out, literally rolling under one of Xandrax's dimensional attacks. But you're limiting yourself by following the traditional probability paths. The prince's response was a blast of pure cosmic energy, wrapped in the pattern of celestial doom. Sarah caught it. She caught it. Then she did something that made several masters faint dead away. She turned it into what she called a dance battle. Check this out, she spun, using the captured energy to fuel a move that combined the neutron dance with something she called the worm. The sacred crystals of the arena began humming in harmony with her movements. Xandrax unleashed the dreaded 7-fold path of destruction. Sarah responded with what appeared to be a combination of capoeira, quantum physics, and what she termed sick pop and lock moves, bro. You cannot defeat centuries of tradition with whatever this is. Xandrax roared, his tentacles turning the air itself into a weapon. Who said anything about defeating it? Sarah laughed, actually laughed, as she danced through his attacks. I'm improving it. Look, if you combine your tentacle wave pattern with this sweet backflip, you get twice the energy resonance. The worst part? She was right. Again, Xandrax's attack patterns were being reflected, amplified, and turned into something entirely new. Each time he launched a traditional form, Sarah would absorb it, transform it, and create something that was somehow both completely unorthodox and undeniably effective. The finale came when Xandrax, in desperation, attempted the forbidden Omega sequence, a move that traditionally takes 7 lifetimes to master. Sarah's response? She started beatboxing. Yes, beatboxing. And somehow, impossibly, the vibrations matched the sacred harmonic frequencies perfectly. The resulting energy cascade was, well, let's just say we're still finding pieces of crystal in orbit around the outer moon. When the light show finally faded, Sarah stood there, still bouncing slightly, while Prince Xandrax lay tangled in his own tentacles, his bioluminescence completely shorted out. That was awesome, Sarah exclaimed, helping untangle the prince. Your energy manipulation is incredible. Have you ever considered combining it with interpretive dance? The aftermath of the trial was interesting, to say the least. The Council of Elders spent 3 days in emergency session, trying to decide whether to classify what they'd witnessed as a triumph or a travesty. They eventually settled on triumphant travesty and called it a day. Prince Xandrax, to everyone's surprise, became Sarah's most dedicated student. The quantum backflip technique has reduced my migraines by 87%, he announced to anyone who would listen. His tentacles now moved with a distinctly earth swagger, as Sarah called it. But the real revelation, it wasn't just about combat forms or sacred traditions. We had spent millennia perfecting our art, moving so slowly toward perfection that we'd forgotten the most important lesson of all: adaptation is the truest form of mastery. The thing about being from Earth, Sarah explained during what became known as the Great Reform of the Academy, is that we had to adapt or die, like all the time. Tuesday, adapt or die. Wednesday, better adapt again. It becomes a habit. Now our halls ring with new sounds, the fusion of ancient wisdom with human innovation. Young initiates learn the traditional forms alongside what Sarah calls freestyle variations. The sacred crystals hum with frequencies we never dreamed possible. And me? Well, I, Grandmaster Vorex Brightclaw, have learned to appreciate the art of going with the flow. I've even started teaching a class that combines quantum manipulation with something Sarah calls the robot. The waiting list is currently 3 centuries long. So perhaps that's the greatest lesson these Deathworlders have taught us. True mastery isn't about perfecting what is known, but being brave enough to dance with the unknown, sometimes literally. Now, if you'll excuse me, I believe Sarah is about to teach the Council of Elders something called breakdance fighting in 11 dimensions. This should be entertaining.